Hello and welcome into another Sun Devil Source podcast presented by Jones Auto Centers. I'm your host, Jacob Brooks, and I'm joined by staff writer Luke Lendler and publisher Chris Karpman. Luke, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jacob. Happy to make my second pod appearance of the week wearing a different collared shirt this time. And I'm happy to be here with you too. I'm excited to talk about Texas State.
And Chris, how's it going for you?
Busy, you know how it goes this time of year. There's no men's basketball, hockey, or baseball going yet, but there's always plenty to do. And there is some other news that we have that's not football related that we're going to get to here.
Yeah, Chris, like you were saying, men's basketball is not going on right now. However, this morning there was bombshell Arizona State men's basketball news that you were all over this morning on your Twitter handle at Chris Karpman. NCAA allegations were made against an unnamed former Arizona State men's basketball player. Chris, what can you give us about that in terms of details?
Yeah, so because of public reporting on some of this, especially in other schools, there were 6 schools had players, one or more players who were alleged by the NCAA, and they're unnamed to this point, to have either bet on or against the team that they played for, past tense, because this player is no longer at ASU, but or they provided information that was privately held about the teams or did not cooperate with the NCAA's investigation on a matter. Sources are telling me that this is one former ASU player that this involves. Also, the NCAA said, and Arizona State said, that the school itself, nor the coaches, Bobby Hurley or others, are under any sort of investigation. So this appears contained to one former player's potential actions. And again, it's an allegation. The player hasn't been named. I don't know who it is, trying to find out that information. This is obviously breaking. We'll get more when we can. But it's a bad look, and it's a black eye for ASU men's basketball and Bobby Hurley going into the final year of his contract, and probably especially so because people will remember the 1990s ASU had the points shaving scandal that was extremely high profile at the time and led to documentaries and all sorts of public reporting, and players who suffered show cause penalties. And ultimately that brought down Bill Frieder's tenure as head coaches of ASU men's basketball in that mid-90s period when this happened. So this is not what you want to have if you're ASU basketball or anybody associated with ASU basketball.
So, Chris, like you said, they are still allegations, but they're very serious allegations. And with that in mind, what do you anticipate are the next steps for this ASU men's basketball program, and also for Bobby Hurley specifically? Because over the last year, people have had a lot of questions about his future as the head coach of Sun Devil men's basketball. Does this change anything for him in your mind?
Well, it probably just makes it even less likely that he will return as ASU's basketball coach beyond this last season. I don't think that this is going to change his status going into the season, but it's not a positive look into what was going on with your basketball program, which also had an extremely disappointing season last year. I think 13-20 or thereabouts, and one of the worst teams in the Big 12. And yes, they had injury problems and all kinds of other issues, but you don't want to have any of your players get caught up in any sort of betting allegations by the NCAA. I think that we eventually will learn who this player is, because there will be a punishment levied against that player if this ultimately allegation becomes something that the NCAA's infractions committee determines requires violations, restitution, or anything along those lines. And Bobby Hurley going into the season in another month or so is not going to want to be answering questions about this, given the fact that ASU has one returning scholarship basketball player, which is the fewest ever. and 14 up to 14 new scholarship players that are being brought into the program. And as I said, when you're in a lame duck contract, which almost no coaches survive being in a lame duck situation. So his situation is extremely tenuous going into his 11th season as ASU men's basketball coach. And this, if anything, is probably going to lead more fans who might have been on the fence or a little bit unhappy to move even more aggressively in that direction about wanting to see some sort of a change happen with ASU men's basketball.
Well, Chris, there will be developments, I'm sure, over the coming days and weeks with that situation. To stay up to date with all of that, make sure to stay up to date on our Sun Devil Source Twitter as well as Chris's Twitter. He was the one to break this news for us earlier this morning. Now, we want to transition into our breakdown, what we're here for, of Arizona State football's matchup against Texas State this Saturday. But first, before that, we're going to have a quick word from our sponsors over at Jones Auto Centers.
For over 60 years, the Glenn Jones name has been recognized for integrity and honesty.
And the Jones Auto Centers in Wickenburg.
Jones Ford Verde Valley.
Take a nice country drive out to Buckeye.
When you're talking about Arizona's best, you're talking about the Jones Auto Group. It's quick, fast, strong.
I want to invite you to visit our new facility in Casa Grande and enjoy our country-style way of doing business. We're the Joneses.
Welcome back into the Sun Devil Source podcast presented by Jones Auto Centers. I'm Jacob Brooks alongside staff writer Luke Lendler, publisher Chris Carpman. We're here to break down Arizona State football's upcoming matchup against Texas State. With Jones Auto Centers on the mind, make sure to check out our description of this podcast, whether you're watching it on YouTube or listening in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're tuning in from, because you can actually contact Parker Jones directly through phone or email if you are interested in buying a new or used vehicle for one of Jones Auto Center's many dealerships around the Valley. Parker Jones and Jones Verde Valley have been huge supporters of ASU's NIL efforts over the past several years, so we're proud to have them as our sponsors, and that's another great reason, if you're a Sun Devil fan, to make them your go-to if you live in the Valley and need a new or used vehicle. All right, now it's time to get into Texas State. Chris, you were at that game last year when ASU narrowly escaped with a victory over the Bobcats. What do you remember from that game, and how do you think that matchup can translate into this upcoming matchup on Saturday?
Well, it was very interesting because that followed ASU's win over Mississippi State in Tempe, in which Sun Devils had a huge rushing performance by Cam Scadaboo. And so going into that game in San Marcos, there was a lot of confidence, and people sort of thought, with Texas State being a fledgling FBS program, that maybe that wouldn't be as close of a game or as difficult of a playing there as it ended up being. And the Sun Devils were pretty fortunate to get away with a 31-28 win. I remember the game was tied back and forth, tied through halftime, through the third quarter. The run game that I had kind of expected to materialize after what Scadaboo had displayed against Mississippi State never really got there. It was one of his least impressive performances of the season. He had around 60 rushing yards, average fewer than 3 yards per carry. And what happened really, I thought, was that the asymmetric pressure of Texas State in the run game was disruptive. You had a lot of guys that were squeezing their way into gaps that were not expected, defensive linemen that are lighter but quicker and shifty type of athletes who are able to kind of be disruptive at the point of attack and play their way into the backfield. And there was overload pressures and blitzes, and Texas State was very comfortable giving up some man coverage and seeing if Sam Leavitt, who of course at the time was a young quarterback playing for the first time as a starter on the road in a not a loud crowd but a hostile environment, and he did reasonably well given the circumstances. Completed almost 2/3 of his passes and had around 250 yards and a touchdown, and Jordan Tyson made a bunch of catches and went over 100 yards. And so those thing sort of lend itself to questions about what will happen in this game. And then on the other side, I felt like ASU didn't do as well stopping the run against Texas State as I expected would be the case. Mobile quarterback, Jordan McLeod, then they have a new quarterback now, but he's also mobile, and they run a lot of the similar types of concepts. And McLeod threw the ball a ton, 40-something throws, and Texas State was able to hit some chunk plays and move the ball reasonably well. Probably better than I had expected in some of the RPO stuff early on in the game, and coming off of that Mississippi State game that ASU just played where it gave up the 3 long play touchdowns. There's some potential concerns about those types of things, especially with a quarterback who's able to throw off platform and some speed at the wide receiver positions. And so there's a lot of challenges that ASU will have in this game, playing against a team that is pesky and plays hard and has some athleticism across the board.
So with all that in mind, I want to swing it over to you, Luke. You've been knee-deep in Texas State stats and numbers and crunching everything with your First Look article. I want to know, what have you found out about Texas State's offense? How do the Bobcats look in terms of returners, newcomers, their schemes? What could Sun Devil fans expect to see from that unit on Saturday?
Well, I think Chris hit on it pretty well. They're an athletic unit on both sides of the ball, but particularly on offense, it's a lot of quick, twitchy players, quick, twitchy skill position players. But in terms of retention from last year, they have little to none. They have a new offensive coordinator, Mark Leftwich. Last year was one of the best offensive coordinators in the country. His offense at Texas State was averaged 476 yards per game. That was 5th nationally in a top 10 full of Power 5 dominant offenses. Then you just see Texas State down there, a Sun Belt team. They were the only team in the country that was top 15 in rushing yards per game and top 25 in passing yards per game. McLeod was a standout quarterback. He was 17th in the country, according to PFF's grading system. And Leftwich, of course, like as is the case with a lot of small programs in college football nowadays, he gets scooped up by a bigger program. Texas State brings him in to be its offensive coordinator for this huge season they have with all this NIL investment they've put in. But now the signal caller is Brad Jackson, a redshirt freshman. So head coach G.J. Kinney brought in 3 transfer quarterbacks. He brought in a plethora of transfer guys, but he brought in 3 transfer quarterbacks, a former blue chip from Auburn, a couple established guys, the group of 5 level. And Jackson welcomed all newcomers and beat him out. He had a pretty impressive camp and has looked pretty good so far through 2 weeks. Like Chris said, he's very good off platform, and he's particularly very strong against the blitz. He has a 90.1 PFF grade when blitz this season. It's one of the best marks in the country. And, for a young quarterback who has already played a road game in the Alamo Dome in week 2 against UTSA, to have such a strong number against the blitz is pretty impressive. So ASU is going to have to be wary of that. And the skill positions, they lost their leading rusher, who transferred to Arizona. They lost their top 2 receivers to graduation, and their 3rd receiver transferred to Baylor. So for Texas State, it's all about Bo Sparks on the outside. He is, just as his name sounds, electric. He's barely 6 feet tall, but he's quick. He was their punt returner last year, and this season he's kind of stepped into the role as their leading receiver. He was a downfield threat. They basically look for him at least once a drive on a play action pass. This is an offense that likes to run it heavily on early downs. So 1st and 2nd down, they will really try to pound the ball inside. They kind of distribute their runs evenly between a gap scheme and a zone scheme. It kind of is just pick your poison if you're them. But on 3rd down, it doesn't really matter the down and distance. They really like to just play action pass, let Jackson drop back, try to hang in there against the blitz and fire it downfield. And he's found sparks a number of times this season on play action passes, particularly with pressure in his face. They looked for him early against UTSA. They couldn't hit him on a first drive. Jackson kind of overthrew the ball, but later in the game, they hit him for a 75-yard pass with the Bobcats backed up inside their 10. So that Jackson to Sparks connection is certainly something to watch for an offense that is really just new from top to bottom. Looking within the program, Kinney hired his offensive coordinator, who was an assistant for 5 years under him. He has some offensive coordinator experience at the small school level, but had really never done it before at the group of 5 or the mid to high FBS level. So for Kinney this year, it's going to be all about how do I maintain the success of last year, especially offensively. And so far, he's done a pretty good job with a wide variety of new faces on that side of the ball.
Yeah, very impressed with his coaching staff. as some ASU staff members said, Brian Ward, Kane Dillingham, they do a very good job of playing to their personnel, understanding how to put them in positions to be successful. They have guys that many of whom are kind of on the undersized, edge of the spectrum, but they're very good athletes. I think that their evaluations, bringing players in at Texas State and then figuring out how to best deploy them, has been one of the strengths of Kinney. And so they're going to have a good approach to what they're doing. It's not different than last year offensively. The structure, even though they have a new quarterback, new coordinator, a lot of up-tempo RPO action, quick game, try to get you dirty eyes in the back in the secondary. You're making mistakes, try to slip receivers by you. They're going to run the football, as Luke said, heavy dosage, man, gap scheme, zone scheme. And their offensive line is probably one of the weaker areas of the team, from what I gathered. They a lot of times you had two guys going with one defensive player on some blitzes and stunts and some actions in their first couple of games. Of course, they're making an adjustment, trying to get their feet wet, but that's a situation that I think that some opponents have been able to exploit. But they've put up numbers, pretty consistently in a balanced sort of a way. Their quarterback, for being a freshman, has shown pretty good moxie to this point. He's thrown for 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's had a 65% completion rate. And then last week's opponent was like a solid, comparable level opponent for them, right? Like, they haven't obviously played against a defense like ASU's in the Power 4, and so that's a much bigger challenge. But Brad Jackson, for being a freshman, has impressed me. Off-platform throws, on the move, plenty of arm talent down the field. Is he going to be able to thread the needle through zone windows? I think that's kind of one of the more bigger questions that he's going to face, and especially this week. The running backs are not as good probably as what ASU is going to face from several teams in the Big 12, but nothing to slouch at. And then their top running back, Bo Sparks, whom Luke also referenced, he was a 10.49 100-meter guy in track at El Paso. And very first series of the game against UTSA, they tried to hit him on a big play. The ball was well underthrown. But given that potency, and especially that off-platform ability to throw on the move, post-route capability, those big plays for this team, particularly to Sparks, also maybe to Chris Don, who's a very undersized guy, 5'7", but he also has a lot of speed, and he's had a 22-yard average, 22.7 yards per catch to this point on 7 catches because of that big play capability. But Sparks has all 5 of their receiving touchdowns. And just like an ASU, which is trying to move Jordan Tyson around the formation to get him open and make the most of him, and beating the tendencies from a coverage and from a personnel vulnerability standpoint, that's the type of thing that Texas State's trying to do with Bo Sparks. So ASU is going to have to be super mindful of wherever he's out on the field. And then we're going to get into the matchup here in the next segment.
Yeah, Chris, you touched on it perfectly. Let's get right into how ASU's defense matches up against that Texas State offense. ASU's defense had some plays last week that frustrated a lot of Sun Devil fans, with the explosive plays given up to that Mississippi State offense in that road loss. Luke, how do you think that ASU's defense is not only going to match up against that electric Texas State offense that you were talking about, but also try and correct the mistakes that were very apparent last week?
Well, the proof is going to have to be in the pudding if you're Brian Ward's unit. I mean, this is a team, much like Mississippi State, that has a very quick receiver on the outside. They are going to try to hit him deep down the field multiple times, just like Mississippi State did. Mississippi State was very successful. And like Chris said, they try to kind of force dirty eyes into the backfield, miscommunications on the back end. And if you're head coach Kinney and you see with the film that ASU put up against Mississippi State, these miscommunications that cost them 7 points in crucial moments, you're certainly going to try to take advantage of that when you play them this weekend. But like Chris said, I think the biggest prove it right now for Jackson is how is he going to face against zone coverage, fitting balls in tight windows, recognizing what happens pre-snap. They've done a pretty good job, Kinney and company, in terms of not asking him to do too much. They are simplifying his role a lot. Again, they're not putting too much on his plate. Like Chris said, RPOs with one look, play action passes with one look deep down the field. If he's not open, run it. And so for Arizona State, the biggest thing for them is how can you get pressure on this guy without blitzing? Because when they have such an explosive downfield passing attack like they do, they want you to blitz. They want to get into the one-on-one matchups where they can suddenly force miscommunications from your defense, coverage busts on the back end, and their quick receivers can get steps on potentially your slower cornerback. So how is the ASU defensive line going to be able to pressure Jackson, again, without blitzing, without sending an extra guy? Can the two big boys up front, can they kind of collapse the pocket, push the pressure towards the feet of Jackson and make him bail out of the pocket? Yes, he's good off platform, but even any quarterback in the country, particularly younger ones, are going to probably be a little bit more prone to mistakes when they're forced to bail out of the pocket early. His eyes are going to drop. Again, he hasn't been a turnover machine at all by any stretch of the imagination, but he still has left some to be desired in terms of decision-making when he's bailed out of the pocket. So for Arizona State, it's going to be how can they contain him? How can they spy him with their linebackers? How can their defensive line put enough pressure on him to avoid Ward having to call a blitz? And just can that back end just correct itself? It's really going to be on ASU to correct itself from last week. How can you avoid those miscommunication problems? How can you avoid those coverage busts? Because Texas State is probably going to try to do exactly what Mississippi State did. So it's going to be in the proof for Arizona State. How can they address those kind of challenges that Texas State might throw at them in terms of those similar switch concepts, forcing, if ASU is in man coverage, these communications on the back end. So I would not be surprised if Ward plays it safer this weekend. We see a lot more zone coverage, trying to put it on the quarterback to take the check down and take the easy play when he's dropping back in a non-play action setting. So we will have to see in terms of how Ward approaches his defensive scheming against this offense. But honestly, it's going to be on ASU to just simply be better. There's not a lot of ways that Texas State is going to out-talent or really even out-scheme them. It's going to be about ASU. Can they communicate? Can they just be better than they were last weekend?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it's stopping the run, right? Like ASU success last season was such predicated on being first in the Big 12 in run defense, and the Sun Devils didn't have a particularly good run defensive performance against Texas State last year. So when you're facing again a freshman quarterback who's never done it before, first of all, make him put the game on his shoulders because they're not able to run the ball. And then if you can't run the ball, that makes it harder to get an opponent's players biting on play actions and RPOs, forcing them to bring up an extra defender into the box. Those are the things that allow for a higher likelihood of big plays in the passing game to occur. So right from the outset, ASU is going to have to control the line of scrimmage against a team that's going to be smaller, not as physically dominant, but can be pesky in some of the movements to try to keep defensive players off balance and unable to kind of get their hands located where they want to on these guys at the point of attack. Justin Watley is going to be back for ASU. That's kind of a big thing. He's one of the better overall defensive linemen and run stoppers, especially from the edge. Everybody else in the front from ASU's team last year is back, other than Jeff Clark in D tackle and Caleb McCullough at linebacker. Those shouldn't be big losses to overcome this season for ASU. So got to win at the point of attack. And then Mississippi State showed that it was able to exploit ASU's boundary side safety, Miles Rouser, on the first play for a big touchdown, or the first breakdown for a big touchdown. And also ASU had problems at the nickel position between Montana Warren and Kendrick Breedlove in coverage, especially on that fateful final touchdown play that Mississippi State had, which was the game winner. ASU was in a quarters coverage with a blitz, no safety help. probably the most conservative coverage that you can be in when you're also don't have a high center field safety who's kind of, there as a stopgap in case something breaks down. But even with that coverage being the more conservative with the blitz, they had a bust with Breedlove not playing his quarter into the hash on the play side. And that turned into a catastrophic thing when coupled with Xavier Alford's inability to get to the quarterback because he caught his foot on the receiver, inside slot receiver's foot. So I expect that opponents, not just Texas State, but other teams, are going to try to find a way to get coverage situations to try to go at Miles Rouser, go at wherever ASU's nickel player is lined up. And so ASU is going to have to be very mindful of that and protective of that such that it doesn't give up big plays. They only gave up 5 explosive plays against Mississippi State in the entire game. That's a very low rate overall. We're talking about 10+ yard run plays, 15+ yard passing plays. The problem, though, is that 3 of them went for touchdowns, and that is a really terrible ratio of touchdowns allowed per big play. So had they given up explosives that weren't touchdowns, ASU wins that game. This is another game where you cannot really imagine that Texas State is going to have better personnel across the board or should be able to have more yards than ASU or more points than ASU unless ASU gives up some big plays or if Sam Leavitt continues to play really poorly as he did against Mississippi State, which we'll get into in a little bit.
Yeah, Chris, we'll get into that in a little bit. But for now, I want to go back over to you, Luke, and we're going to take a look at Texas State's defense. Is it similar to the offense in terms of amounts of returners and newcomers and turnover and everything like that? Or is it different than that side of the ball? And what schemes does it look like they could probably be using against ASU on Saturday?
So it's similar and different in a number of ways. It is similar in that they had a lot of replacing to do in the offseason. They lost 14 of the 18 defensive players with at least 250 snaps from last season. But they do retain their defensive coordinator, Dexter McCoyle, who was promoted from safeties coach prior to 2024. He's back for a second season. So very little has changed about the scheme. They still run predominantly a 4-2-5, but they use a lot of bear fronts, which is a 5-man front usually. And their defensive ends, unlike really any other team in the country, will often line up in 2-point stances, not 3-point stances. They almost will look like receivers kind of on the edge of the defensive line because they try to emphasize speed and quickness on this defense more than really anything else. Their defensive linemen are, again, usually on the edge, are typically skinnier, but taller and faster than you might see the average program have. Particularly, they bring back senior edge rusher Khalil Alexander, led the team in sacks last year with 7. So far this year, he has not registered a sack, but he's 6'3", 225 pounds. He's a quick twitch guy. And for Texas State, they want their defensive ends to basically force the quarterback to move up in the pocket, where, again, the middle of that defensive line, the middle of that bare front is always trying their best to run stunts, twists, to get into those gaps and make the quarterback basically step into a sack. This is Dillingham used this phrase about NAU. He used it, in reference against Texas State last year. They're an exotic front. They really are. They are kind of different than you might see a lot of teams in the country, and that has led to a lot of boom or bust success for them. On the defensive line, they had a very good pass rush last year. This year, it just isn't hitting at the same rate. They only have 3 sacks on their name as a team. Only one player is a defensive end who has a sack. The other 2 players with sacks are cornerback, is a cornerback transferred from TCU, who actually went to the exact same high school as Xavier Alford and played there at the same time, and a linebacker who was there last year. It's just a unit that is very explosive, hit or miss, just like the offense. It's very explosive in terms of the plays they can pull off. But also for them, it's the run game is really where they've struggled so far this season. When you kind of emphasize speed, agility, quick twitch, that is where you're going to sometimes struggle when you're potentially outmatched physically. The offense has been incredible. They have scored 30 points and then 50 points in 2 games this year. But the defense has also given up 30 points and 40 points in both their contests this season. It's not a consistent unit. It's a unit that often breeds a lot of chaos early in games because teams are kind of confused by what they see. But as the game settles into a rhythm and you come out of halftime, even if you go into the second quarter, teams start to kind of speed up and get to the pace that Texas State is playing at. And then when the playing field is even in terms of pace and effort, Texas State so far this season has shown kind of the inability to physically match who they're playing against. So for Arizona State, it's going to be a question of, can they keep their heads early on and can they lean on their run game much like they did last week against Mississippi State? In the secondary, McCoyle was a secondary coach before he was a defensive coordinator, but he'd probably be a little bit disappointed with the turnover generation from his back end so far this season. They haven't really been the chaos creators that they were last year. They have yet to register a takeaway at all on defense. They have a plethora of TFLs, which hasn't translated to high sack numbers or even a takeaway at all. They still a very chaotic unit, but at the end of the day, this is a unit that it still has struggled to really kind of put the lid on drives and to hold teams. And they bend, but then they break. They're not really a bend but don't break unit. They have really struggled to put a lid on drives, put a lid on teams, especially late in contests.
Yeah, one very small correction. They gave up 36 points, not 40 points in their second game after 27 points in their first game. So, but roughly in that ballpark. The thing that I noticed about Texas State is they get gashed in the run game, and that part of that I think is related to the aggression that they play. When you play a gap cancellation style and you're trying to shoot gaps and have guys flying in there, sometimes that can work against you with some of the play calls just being bad luck against what some of the offensive calls are, or one guy gets blocked or one linebacker is out of a gap and then all of a sudden you got a big gain. I think that they are pretty impressive in terms of their athleticism and how hard that they play. It's just that the integrity of what I'm seeing there is very spotty at this point. And part of that, I'm sure, as Luke said, is they have a bunch of new players that they're trying to really kind of get up to speed and all on the same page from a communication standpoint. I think that their defensive linemen are kind of some of the more impressive looking guys on the team, even though they haven't done a great job stopping the run. So that's a little bit of a contrast than what you would maybe expect. But opponents have been able to move the ball pretty consistently on the ground, and those are lesser opponents than they're going to be going up against this week. And so I'm curious to see like how that looks. And then if they do decide to bring a lot more run blitzes and pressures that they are prone to, what that does from a man coverage standpoint against the assignments of ASU, how they handle, putting guys in the man conflict situation, because there have been times when they've been very vulnerable in some one-on-ones, and some of them have been connected on and others haven't. But their games, they tend, as Luke said, they tend to have a very sort of up and down, free, flowing style to them, where there's a lot of points on the board. And I don't know that is going to happen. That's very unlikely to happen coming into Tempe. And so I'm curious to see if this defense is going to be able and ready to not give up explosive plays.
Well, Chris, it's funny that you touch on explosive plays, because that's been a theme that Kenny Dillingham has touched on since the beginning of preseason camp. He wants more explosive plays, more explosive plays, more explosive plays. Following the Mississippi State game, he had another thing that he wanted the offense to kind of tap into more, which is he said he wanted more receivers not named Jordan Tyson to be involved in the offense. He said in his Monday press conference that he takes responsibility for that. He thinks it's his job to scheme guys open and make a deliberate point of getting them involved. However, he still thinks that that's something that the offense needs to focus on moving forward. So with that in mind, I want to turn it over to you, Luke. How can ASU's offense take advantage of those kind of gashes and bend, but also break, things that Texas State's defense has this upcoming Saturday? And do you think that they will get more guys involved?
I think we could see Arizona State really taking advantage of Texas State's overcorrection. I think the Bobcats are coming into this game knowing Arizona State just ran the ball right down Mississippi State's throats for an entire half last week. And now we have struggled against the run a lot this season. And we're going up against a unit with multiple good running backs. Again, we're not sure if Kyson Brown's going to play or not. It seems unlikely, but still, Raleek Brown, Kanye Udo, both very strong performances against an SEC defensive line. So the Bobcats are probably coming into this one thinking, listen, we have to do what we have to do to stop these running backs. That's surely what Arizona State's going to attack first. And then just like Chris said, that could leave a lot of one-on-one matchups. That could leave Tyson on an island. Levitt could be looking for Tyson early. Then suddenly the overcorrection is going to come. They're going to start giving a lot more attention to Tyson. And that's really when guys like Malik McLean, Jaron Hamilton, Shimon Mateer could really break out. We could really see ASU kind of key in on the over-aggressiveness of the Bobcats. We could see some screenplays go to the backside. I would not be stunned if we saw a tight end screen a couple times in this one. They ran it in the red zone on occasion last year to varying degrees of success. This year, I think this is the perfect kind of scheme lineup for them to work a backside screen of that nature. I think ASU is going to get a lot of guys involved against this defense. I think this defense might not necessarily have that blue chip talent to prevent ASU from at least generally doing what it wants to do. It's just a matter of, can ASU deal with the initial chaos that will be caused? Like Chris mentioned, run blitzes, pressures, stuff up the middle is probably going to be the name of the game for Texas State early and often. So it's how can ASU deal with TSU's kind of overcorrection, and can they take advantage and kind of stay one step ahead of what the Bobcats are trying to do? That I think they can. So I definitely think of all the games so far this season, this one holds the most likelihood that we'll see guys not named Jordan Tyson involved in the pass game.
Look, if anything has been learned from the first two games by each of these teams, it's that Texas State needs to be a lot better at defending the run, and ASU needs to try to establish the run. So those things are going to be very much in conflict coming into this game because, of course, Texas State's going to try to make Sam Levitt have to throw the ball to be successful and probably have to throw the ball to people other than Jordan Tyson, although that remains to be seen whether or not they'll be able to prevent ASU from doing that. I think that with Jalen Moss probably unlikely to play in this game, when ASU's had the top slot receiver off the field against Mississippi State, they went to more 12 personnel, played two tight ends. They showed that they could run the ball very effectively between Raleek Brown, Kanye Udo, even after Kyson Brown got hurt and he's not expected to play in this game. Seems pretty obvious that we're going to see a healthy dose of 12 personnel from the outset and a emphasis on trying to establish the run if you're ASU, because that's kind of what didn't happen against Mississippi State, which then led to no rhythm being established. And then I think very importantly, when you're not running the ball, if you're ASU, you're trying to get rhythm throws for Sam Levitt that get completions and make everybody feel good about what they're trying to do. And that might not be Jordan Tyson. That might be hitches with your tight ends, quick play actions and boots with level concepts to get the ball where Levitt he can run it, or he could throw it to a back or a tight end. I think throwing the ball on screens to backs or in other concepts to your backs is a very smart thing to do with Raleek Brown in particular. ASU is going to have to get more involvement with other guys in the passing game. Of course, Sam Levitt overthrew Malik McLean twice in the first quarter, and he's 6'4" and a tough target to overthrow. And then he missed other guys that were open on opportunity. So it's not just about the throws you make, it's about the reads and the accuracy. You got to have all that stuff kind of coming together in concert, coupled with ASU being able to establish more of a rhythm and a run game. And then you can't have the penalties operationally that cause problems against NAU, while also expecting to not have any of the crowd noise causing operational issues that existed at Mississippi State. So Ben Coleman being a lot more in a rhythm at center, working in better flow with Sam Levitt, the backs kind of being cohesively involved, having some of the throws be very early, easy when you're not running the ball behind your 12 personnel, and Raleek Brown and Kanye Udo validating the performances that they had against Mississippi State as legitimate and what can be expected from them moving forward. All those things super important. And oh, by the way, Sam Levitt is throwing the ball in jeopardy too much, and you can't turn the ball over against a lesser opponent at home, because that's one of the easiest ways to allow them to hang into the game. So no interceptions, no fumble giveaways, except the short passes, the things that are easier and more manageable for Sam Levitt. Adhere to your game plan and really make an emphasis on trying to run the football early. Those are the things that are the recipes for ASU success.
So now I want to transition over to special teams a little bit. We'll touch on Texas State special teams and ASU special teams. I want to start with the opponent, Texas State. Luke, what did you find in your research of the Bobcats about their special teams unit? Is it something that could maybe be a foil in the plans for Kenny Dillingham and company come Saturday?
Well, in the kicking game last year, they had a real weapon in Mason Shipley. He made multiple kicks from beyond 50, including one from 60 yards last season, but he is gone. And he is replaced by Tyler Robles, a transfer from USC, who has made one from 50 so far this year, but has only kicked 3 field goals. This is an offense that punches it in. They have a 100% rate in the red zone. This is an offense that does not kick a lot of field goals. They will be aggressive on 4th down. So they don't ask a lot from their kicker. Their punter, David Nunez, is back from last season. But really, the name to watch is Bo Sparks. He was a preseason all-conference punt returner, and teams have been trying to avoid him by any means necessary this year. He's only gotten off 2 returns so far this season, just 2 for 33 yards. Last year, though, there's a reason he made preseason all-conference. He was pretty elite in the punt return category. He returned just 4, but he scored a touchdown. His average was 50 yards because he had a long punt return touchdown. And so he's kind of been the emphasis of that Texas State special teams unit so far this season. He is very good in tight spaces. He's very good in the open field. And just like Chris mentioned, it's going to be all about discipline for Arizona State, not only with the procedural penalties, but also in the special teams unit, chopping their feet, wrapping up. Can they trust their punters to just keep the ball high enough in the air to where Sparks has to fair catch it? Those are going to be the biggest questions for who's going to win that battle in the special teams category, because kickoffs have kind of been moot on both sides. Nobody's returning anything for Texas State for the most part. Arizona State, again, hasn't been wildly effective in kickoff returns yet. It's a matter of, in the punt return battle, can ASU cover Sparks, who is an electric weapon in the open field, in tight spaces? How are they going to be able to control him? And do they trust their punters enough to hang the ball high up in the air, let the gunners get down the field, and force Sparks to call fair catches?
Yeah, it's an interesting point from you there, Luke, because it segues right into what I was going to ask Chris about ASU's special teams. Canyon Floyd was Big 12 Special Teams Player of the Week 1 against NAU. Then week 2, outside of a long-distance Jesus Gomez field goal, it was kind of a rocky week on the special teams side over in Starkville. Chris, what did you make of that performance? Obviously, you were there. And then what do you see from ASU special teams in terms of matching up against the Bobcats this week?
Yeah, biggest thing I noticed was Raleek Brown's avoidance of catching the ball in the punt game when he really needed to in a couple situations. It didn't end up costing ASU much in terms of field position in that particular game, but there was a ball that he let bounce inside the 10 that could have easily bounced down into the 1 or 2 or 3. And you got to catch that ball wherever you're at, the 11, 12, 10-yard line, and allow your team to not be backed up. And that's even more of a potential issue if you're more like on the 20 or 25 and you get a bounding ball that gets 20 yards a roll because you didn't step up and fair catch that ball. It's completely okay if you're not returning a ball that was returnable. Like that's an acceptable mistake, and you're going to get better at. Maybe you weren't in the right position to feel comfortable about fielding it cleanly or whatever, but you do have to be able to field the ball to make any sort of an impact as a returner. And Raleek Brown's super athletic, but it starts with the fundamentals. And with absent that, you really can't show what you can do athletically. Now, Canyon Floyd's performance wasn't nearly as good as he was in the opener against NAU when he won the award that you mentioned there, Jacob. I thought the first punt, they used that kind of a rugby rollout style, and that's harder for punters who are conventional style punters to be able to get that drop as reliable. And again, we've talked about this before on the podcast. Floyd has a big leg. That's what enabled him to have over 3 50-yard punts to this point through 2 games in the season. But I think they need to make sure that he's able to make good contact to flip the field to prevent shorter fields for Texas State, especially as a lesser opponent, right? We already kind of knew that Jesus Gomez had a big leg and he was probably going to be pretty good as long as the operation was clean with the snapping and holding. That enabled him to hit a 50, whatever it was, 50 something yard field goal against Mississippi State in a hostile environment. And ASU didn't really have any big vulnerabilities in the return game. So I feel like this is a game where ASU should have at least an equivalent, if not better, opportunity to win special teams. But just as Luke said, you cannot give up anything to Sparks with his 10.49 100-meter speed. That could be really problematic. I think especially on kickoffs, ASU needs to put the ball out of the back of the end zone rather than allow some of these higher kicks that are being caught and potentially returned just outside the goal line.
All right, with all that in mind, we will get into our keys for the game for a potential ASU victory and our official prediction for this ASU versus Texas State matchup. But first, we're going to have another quick word from another one of our sponsors, drinkontheslide.com. Hello and welcome back into the Sun Devil Source video podcast presented by Jones Auto Centers. I'm your host, Jacob Brooks, alongside staff writer Luke Lindler, publisher Chris Karpman. Guys, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this episode that everyone's been waiting for, our keys to the game and our official prediction. Let's just get right into it with you, Luke.
So, in my opinion, this is a pretty unique opportunity for ASU to get right heading into conference play. This is an opponent that they match up with pretty well in a lot of capacity, especially after we saw the run game be so successful last week. Number one key to the game for me, without a doubt, is establishing the run early. Texas State is going to try to throw the kitchen sink at ASU. There will be run pressures. There will be a lot of funky looking things on the defensive end. For ASU to keep their heads and run the ball and know that we are bigger, we are stronger, we can push this team around, that will be huge to unlocking whatever they want to do in the second half. If you shorten this game, you can limit Texas State's explosive offense and keep it lower scoring and make possessions more valuable. Texas State likes to play this chaos ball where they kind of throw away possessions here and then, but then they'll also hit a 65-yard touchdown pass the next possession. When you run the ball, you can own time of possession. You make every possession so valuable. You limit the game, limit the amount of times Texas State touches the ball. ASU should be in the driver's seat this entire game, and it starts with the running game. And so for me, the number one key, hands down, is running the football and kind of not letting Texas State throw you off your line. Defensively, it's just going to be about that defensive line. It's about getting that four-man pressure on Jackson. We have seen he has struggled. He's really struggled when he's being pressured by a four-man front. When he's being blitzed, 90 PFF grade, exceptional stuff. When he's being pressured by a four-man front, the grade chops in half. It's 45, and it's one of the lowest marks in the country. That's when we really see the redshirt freshman in him start to come out. When he doesn't have the numbers advantage down the field, when he doesn't have a simple route to go. So if ASU can run zone and pressure him with a four-man front, on the offensive end, can they run the ball? Can they dictate time of possession? Can they shorten the game and make every possession so valuable? Can they play more disciplined football? To me, that's what's going to separate it. If you had to ask me, I think Arizona State it's a close game in the first quarter. I think ASU pulls away in the second quarter, and I think the Sun Devils win and cover the spread on Saturday.
Do you have an official score for that, Luke?
I would say 26-13, 26-12, because the spread's 13.5.
Okay, Chris, to you.
Yeah, look, I think ASU is going to have to dominate the line of scrimmage. It's pretty straightforward. That was, I think, the key against Mississippi State, especially with the run game potency and what had happened the prior year. ASU somehow accomplished that, but still lost because of the big play touchdowns allowed and how much Sam Leavitt struggled. It's just impossible to predict that ASU is going to give up 3 big play touchdowns and that Sam Leavitt's going to play that bad to overcome ASU dominating at the point of attack. You don't want this to be a track meet, high possession game. I think what Luke said is exactly right. Totally agree. I thought last week was going to be a low scoring game, and it ended up being well under the under. So I was at least right about that, even though I was wrong about ASU winning by a touchdown. I think running the ball early is crucial, especially given what we know about what's happened in the last couple weeks and what ASU's bread and butter should be against a team that has lesser caliber athletes. You got to be able to push those guys back at the line of scrimmage and run the ball pretty consistently to create more opportunities that are easier for your quarterback. And look, ASU is going to have to not give up big plays at Javen Robinson, who got beat in man coverage against Mississippi State on a couple of occasions, and only one of which went for a touchdown, but others could have been big plays. And then also you got to get that nickel position solidified between Montana Warren and Kendrick Breedlove and make sure that Miles Rouser isn't having any coverage issues. I think if ASU is able to do that, this is a game that it should win going away. Really. I saw a line, I don't know about the most recent line. I saw a line that was like 16. So I'm going to have to look and see if there's been a lot of movement here since this posted. But I think ASU is going to win by a couple touchdowns, maybe not cover, depending on what that line is exactly at right now. But I'm going to go with ASU winning by a score of 41-27.
Okay, so high scoring game for the ASU offense. I'm kind of on the same wavelength as you there, Chris. Honestly, my biggest key to the game for ASU was just completely snatched by Luke when he was talking about establishing the run game. So I don't want to just regurgitate everything that he said. So I'm getting into my second biggest key of the game. And I hate to do this because I hate when people get so cliche about this at the college level and in the NFL, and when they make it a quarterback versus quarterback thing. I think that this needs to be a big game from Sam Leavitt. I think that he is the X factor here. When you look at ASU, you look at a win against NAU where, yeah, the team won, but Kenny Dillingham and many fans all agreed that it was not a pretty win. It was not up to the standard and the ceiling that was being expected from a team that just made the college football playoff. Then you go on the road to Mississippi State. Sure, there were positives to take away from the second half, but you lost in week 2 in non-conference play. Now, it is the last week of non-conference play, and there were high expectations placed upon Sam Leavitt heading into this season. Maybe some of those expectations were premature. Maybe some of them were unfair. But he was expected to be a Heisman candidate, a potential Heisman frontrunner. Him and Jordan Tyson were widely regarded as the best returning quarterback wide receiver duo in college football. And so far, I haven't seen anything from Sam, even though on paper, on the box score, he played phenomenal against NAU. He needs to have that it performance. He needs to have that performance where Sun Devil fans can watch it and go, that is a guy that can lead our team to the college football playoff. And it's the last week of non-conference. You're heading into a conference that Kenny Dillingham has talked about on many occasions about being a conference where almost every game could end up being one score. You have no idea who's going to come out on top on a week-to-week basis. In those clutch situations, you need a guy in the driver's seat of your offense that you know you can trust. And right now, I think that Leavitt's in a position where he needs to earn back that trust from ASU fans following the loss in Starkville. So I think just a big-time performance from Leavitt to prove wrong the narratives that have been being put about him online that he addressed in his press conference on Tuesday. Just put all that to rest and have a big-time performance. That would be the biggest key to an ASU victory. And as for my official score prediction, I do think that that is going to happen. I'm going to be an optimist in this situation. I think that ASU is going to win. I think it's going to be more on that high scoring side, like Chris was talking about. I think that it is going to be 38-20 ASU winning and covering the spread, unless, like Chris was saying, there's a bunch of crazy movement and it ends up just becoming too high of a spread. That's my official prediction. And honestly, that'll do it for the three of us for this podcast previewing Arizona State football's matchup with Texas State. Chris, you're going to have a written scouting preview to complement this podcast, go even more in depth on everything the ASU fans could be looking for from a schematic standpoint for this matchup. So that'll be dropping, I believe you said Friday afternoon. So if all of you want to tune into more Texas State, Arizona State analysis in a more written format, I recommend all of you go check that out when it does drop. But that'll do it for us. From your host, Jacob Brooks, Luke Lendler, Chris Carmen, we appreciate all of you guys tuning into this episode of the podcast. Make sure to subscribe to our Sun Devil Source YouTube channel or follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you are listening. And for all of our coverage of ASU football's matchup against Texas State, be sure to stay up to date on our Devil Sanctuary board, as well as all of our Sun Devil Source socials, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok. We hope you guys all have a great rest of your day, and thank you for tuning in.